Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. Well, I think it's time we begin a new tie-in. In this case, a mini-series focusing on a particular group of spider people. Now, if you are familiar enough with Spider-Man, then you know that there are certain story tropes that are very much associated with a character. The death of Uncle Ben, with great power there must come great responsibility, deals with the devil, and in some cases, cloning. Now, while this isn't the case with most Spider-Man across the multiverse, if this particular Spider person is popular enough and has had a series go on long enough, odds are at some point in their career they've dealt with cloning. And of course, this all tends to start with the main universe, as Spider-Man has had his fair share of clone shenanigans across his run. And of course, because of how, like I said, since this is a popular trope with Spider-Man, it has been repeated across the multiverse in various forms. We've seen it. Recently we've seen it with Spider-Gwen. Miles Morales has dealt with his share of it. We even see, and of course, there are a handful of clone Spideys that we have seen take part in Spider-Verse. Specifically, a version of Ben Reilly from a universe where he stayed on as Spider-Man and actually had a pretty good life. Kane Parker, who originally was a defective clone of Spider-Man who died during the second Clone Saga, but who got revived and is now trying to turn his life around as the new Scarlet Spider. And of course, the Ultimate Universe version of Jessica Drew, who in her reality was a gender-bent clone of Spider-Man, who went on to become her world's Spider-Woman, and eventually, at this point in the comics timeline, the second Black Widow. And of course, they are each like I said, they're each clones of their world's Peter Parkers. And they've got stories to tell, specifically a mini-series. As, well, for today's tie-in storyline, we're going to be taking a look at a mini-series focused exclusively on the Clone Crew, as I call them. Or in this case, as this mini-series is called, Scarlet Spiders, as, well, when Ben Reilly went on to form his own Spidey persona, he wound up calling himself that, so that's the general term for these clones. In terms of continuity for the mini-series, though, well, let's go back once again to Spider-Verse. Now, if you remember in the Spider-Verse storyline, there was a point in time when the tie-ins kind of branched out, and the Scarlet Spiders miniseries is no exception. Sorry, lunch. Basically, what had happened was that when the Spider Army went to go recruit Otto and his superior Spider Army, the influx of all these different Spider people overloaded Otto's cloaking tech and got the Inheritors right at their door, as I mentioned during when I started talking about the Spider-Woman tie-ins. And of course, while both Spider Armies were able to fight Deimos and beat him, specifically with Otto Octavius landing a killing blow, the victory was short-lived, as quickly after Deimos was killed, well, a portal opened and he came walking out with Brix and Bora alongside him to act as backup. Immediately, the Spider Army was wondering how the hell he came back, even though they just saw him die and his body was lying right over there. However, the clone Spideys are able to put together that the Inheritors might have been employing their own form of cloning tech, and so deciding that was the best way of essentially shooting the Inheritors in the knees, they decided that they were going to put a stop to it as as Ben Reilly, Kane Parker, and Ultimate Jessica Drew activated a tridimensional transporter and tuned it to the frequency of the portal that Deimos, Brix, and Bora came out of, resulting in the three of them going off into their own adventure, which is where Scarlet Spiders kicks in. And of course, if we're going to be talking about this miniseries, we gotta talk about it from the beginning as we take a look at Scarlet Spiders #1. And of course, it picks up right where Spider-Verse left off, as we end up seeing Ben, Kane, and Jess as they arrive in what looks like, I want to say a back room or something. I don't know. Basically, it looks like they're in, well, again, a back room. There's pipes all over the place. It basically looks like something that a janitor would go through, albeit shinier. As such, the trio really have no idea what they're in for. As they're wandering about, they find a door, and they fully expect to be walking straight into the lion's den here. After all, this is a world that's most likely ruled by the Inheritors, and when it comes down to supervillain hideouts, they're never usually nice places. So Ben tells his counterparts to prepare for the worst, but when he opens the door, he finds that the world outside is actually really It's actually futuristic. It's technologically advanced. Flying cars, these gigantic technologically advanced structures spanning all across New York. It's actually pretty damn cool. And even Ben is in awe of this. As such, they quit, which again makes sense considering this is supposed to be a world ruled by Genix, and since he's the most scientifically inclined of the inheritors, of course any world ruled by him would probably be a pinnacle of technological advancement. So, again, kind of cool. Again, it's cool, but pretty much before Ben can be too much in awe of this, Jess pulls him back into whatever building they're in and says that, yeah, while they may have cover for this, because apparently before they left they grabbed some cloaking tech from Otto's stash. They're not invisible. If they go swinging around this New York, they're gonna be raising a few eyebrows, and people are gonna realize, hey, there's a team of spider people out there. Let's call the bosses on them. As such, Jess decides that they need to kind of stay undercover, so to speak, which Kane is able to provide for, because while Ben and Jess were talking, he was able to look around the building they were in and discover that they were in a hospital, finding them disguises, so to speak, in the form of, well, hospital gowns, which even Ben is a little embarrassed to try out, because they're the kind of hospital gowns that are open in the butt, but they kind of have to work with what they've got. So, as such, Ben and Jess end up stripping out of their Spidey costumes and dressed into smocks, though Kane thankfully doesn't have to, because his costume actually has a feature which can make him cloak. So all he has to do is just go invisible and nobody will see him. As such, the trio end up leaving out of the back room that they were hiding in, and sure enough, they find that the place is just as, well, cold and machine-like as you would expect. Yes, it looks technologically advanced. Yes, it all looks technologically advanced, but there's not an ounce of humanity in anything, as across all screens are pictures of Gen X who's telling the population how they are all part of some grand complex design or some bullshit like that, and that there's comfort in that complexity, which, to add further to how cold and machine-like everything is, as the trio are standing in the corridor, they happen to see a group of people walking by them, all wearing these weird helmets, and all of them clones of each other, which makes this even creepier, which makes the trio even more creeped out. Either way, they try to push that out of their minds, and they decide that they're going to try and look more into the history of this world as they try to access the nearby terminal, but unfortunately they get caught as one of the doctors that works at the hospital sees Ben and Jess and wants to know why they went out of formation. And since Ben and Jess don't really have an explanation for what they're doing, well, Kane decides, well, screw this thing, and he ends up webbing the guy up to a wall, which unfortunately ends up causing an alarm to go off. As such, with the trio realizing their cover is blown, Jess and Ben get back into their Spidey jammies and realize they need to run, especially since Kane tells them that armed guards are coming for them, so they need to bail out, which Ben at first thinks that maybe they can keep this in the hospital, keep people from getting caught in the crossfire, but in the ensuing battle, they end up blowing a hole in it and end up taking the fight outside, which does actually lead to a really cool fight scene as the trio end up just jumping all across buildings and have to deal with a bunch of armored guards with jetpacks and lasers as they swing around. And it's really cool seeing these three different Spideys in the fight scene, because it does offer some unique takes, because while all three of them are clones of Peter Parker, they all have different unique things about them, which I'll talk about after the plot summary, but it's really cool. However, in the midst of the battle, a new player enters the fray, one that Ben thinks will actually be able to help them. Specifically, this world's Iron Man, who upon arriving asks what in the Great Web is going on here, which confuses the trio, but Ben is able to let his guard down enough as he takes his mask off because, well, he knows his world's Tony Stark, he considers him a friend, and he thinks that this Tony Stark is just as trustworthy as the one from his world, so maybe he can give them some help. This earns him a pulsar blast from Tony Stark's chest piece that ends up hitting Ben and Jess. Which, yeah, Jess knew this was coming a mile away because, well, this is Gen X's world, so odds are any heroes from it are most likely his own personal recipe. As such, while Iron Man is gloating about how he's gotten 3 spiders for the price and how this is going to be great for him, yada yada blah blah blah. Well, the thing is, while he was doing this, he removed the faceplate from his helmet, so leaving his fleshy face right there in the open. Prime for the punching, which is what happens when Kane ends up coming in and smacks Tony right in the face, knocking him out. Unfortunately for Ben, As such, in the meantime, the repulsor blast ultimately wound up knocking Ben out, and as such, Jess and Kane end up taking the unconscious Ben and Tony to I'm guessing a construction site, basically just someplace out of the way that no one will notice them, and basically while Ben is unconscious, Jess ends up taking off Tony's Iron Man armor. And as such, when Ben comes to, he does apologize for his flub up because, well, it was a flub up. He just saw Tony and let his emotions take hold, but Jessica is forgiving of him and brings him back out to talk to Tony. And basically, at first, Ben tries to talk to Tony and tries to essentially talk to who he thinks is the man he knows, but it's clear that guy is not in there. Basically, as Ben tries to connect with him, all Tony says is that he thinks that they're spiders from alternate dimensions, and when Ben asks what the heck happened to him, well, Tony yells at them that essentially he's had his mind opened. Genix has shared such secrets with him. He's been a chief architect for 3 of his cities. He's what he is because Genix allows it and all that bullshit. So it's clear, yeah, there is no trace of the man that Tony Stark is supposed to be in this guy. He is just a clone that Genix may produced from whatever this world's Iron Man used to be, and now he's drunk the Kool-Aid and then some. As such, Kane decides that playing nice is not really helping, so he goes out to Tony and threatens him by just throwing spikes from his wrist and demanding to know where the hell Genix's main cloning facilities are. And as such, Tony just sings like a songbird, as he says that since Genix is probably the smartest individual on this world, where else would he be? The Baxter Building. This does surprise the Spideys a little, because why would he tell them this so readily? And that's because, well, Tony thinks they're gonna fail. Essentially, these are 3 spider people from different realities, and since, the Inheritors hunt spider people for sport, well, if they go there, essentially he thinks that they're going to lose, and since Tony's the one that directed them there, essentially he believes that he'll be taking the credit for their eventual defeat, and that he'll get rewarded. This ultimately prompts Ben to just kind of metaphorically laugh in his face because, well, he's Spider-Man. Things will work out for him. Though even Ben admits that they shouldn't be going in without a plan, and if they try going in guns blazing, it's going to be a bad call, especially since it's the Baxter Building, it's where Genix is holed up, and it's where the primary cloning facility is. They can't just walk in the front door. However, Jess thinks that they can, as she thinks that she may have a plan for getting them inside, but they'll need an escort, so to speak. As such, she ends up taking the discarded pieces of Tony's Iron Man suit and places it on Ben. And the plan? Ben is going to capture Kane and Jess disguised as Iron Man and say that he's got 2 personal clones that have fallen out of line that he needs to deliver to Genix personally, which, yeah, that part of the plan goes off well, as Ben is able to get Kane and Jess through the front door of the Baxter Building, and from there, the next part of the plan comes into fray. In this case, Jess is going to act as a distraction, as once they go through the front door, she breaks free of her shackles, gets into her own Spidey jammies, and begins causing a fuss and causes the guards to go after her. In the meantime, from there, Ben and Kane are supposed to go inside the building and gather whatever intel they can and figure out how to shut this place down, which they almost do, but there's another problem. Because here's the thing, I said that Jess had to get into her Spidey jammies once she stepped through the front door of the Baxter Building, right? Well, the same is true of Kane, as he walks through the front door unmasked. And it's here that I have to remind you, he's a clone of Peter Parker. And so as Ben and Kane are about to walk off while the security team goes after Jess, well, one member of the security team stops the pair because he recognizes Kane. Or more specifically, he recognizes Peter. He'd know his face anywhere. And the final panel of and we reach the final panel of the comic as we see who the head of security for this world's Baxter Building is. Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch. So, yeah, that throws a monkey wrench into the mix. But either way, thoughts on the first issue? I like it. It's really nice. From the outset, one of the things that I think makes the Scarlet Spiders miniseries work is just the trio of different characters we have. Again, it's always, like I said with Spider-Verse, it's always fun seeing different versions of the same character meeting up and interacting, and we've seen that plenty in both the main Spider-Verse storyline and the tie-ins. But what makes the Scarlet Spiders one cool, in my opinion, is that all 3 of the characters aren't just alternate versions of Peter, they're all clones of their world's Peters. And so, as a result of this, you can see traits of the original Peter Parker in each of them, but none of them are Peter. And as a result, their demeanors are all unique and different because of the different situations they were essentially grown up in, that they all grew up in. Case in point, let's start off with Ben. Ben Reilly is probably the closest among the trio who is like Peter Parker. He's much more carefree, he makes more jokes, he quips in battle, he's more fun, and he has more heart in him and wants to see the good in everything. But the difference between him and Peter Parker is that Peter has had a lot more things go wrong in his life, and thus he can be a bit more cautious when it comes to these things. Whereas Ben, he's more jovial, he's more carefree, because like I said, this version of Ben Reilly has had an easy life ever since he took on the role of Spider-Man. Well, he doesn't really see failure as an option, and as a result, he's a lot more overconfident, regardless of the situation. I mean, yes, he understands the dangers of all these things, and even at one point when they go into the hospital and he remarks how they couldn't find the cloning facility, even he's not that lucky, or they couldn't find the primary cloning facility right away. Basically, it's clear that it's clear he's not seeing this as seriously as the other two Spideys are. He sees this as just another adventure. He makes more jokes. He looks for the good in things, and yes, it does leave him more open to getting jumped on. Case in point, when this world's Iron Man showed up, at first Ben thought that it would just be like seeing an old friend again, which unfortunately left him wide open. Now, that's not to say that Ben is blind to these faults, as once he wakes back up from being after getting blasted by Iron Man, he does apologize for his flub up. But basically, it's clear he's a lot more overconfident and cocky and just a bit more carefree than the other Spideys, which it's both refreshing but also slightly annoying. It's refreshing because it's nice to see someone who isn't being all doom and gloom and serious about this despite the odds. This is a guy that looks at this all and thinks, okay, so who do I have to punch in the face to make things right here? And that's what we get, and that's what we see with Ben here. Yes, it's a bit more naive in some regards, but honestly, I like heroes like that. Heroes that look on the bright side of things no matter the circumstances. And quite frankly, I think it's fun. I like it. So I like seeing that with Ben here, so I think it's a nice little balance. But then likewise, we get to Kane. Despite him being a clone of Peter, as I mentioned before with his backstory, he's had a much rougher life. He's not a joker. He's not a fun guy. He doesn't go into battle and start making fun of supervillains because that's what Spider-Man does. He is a guy who speaks with his fists first. And that's what we see in the story. He doesn't joke like Jessica or Ben do. He is pretty much straight to business, and it's clear that he is just trying to keep his anger in check throughout the story. We even kind of mentioned that in the narration, which I'll get to when I get to it. But basically, he's not more feral in battle. He throws his strength around more willingly because he knows what he's capable of, and he knows what he can do to hurt someone. He knows the best way to hurt someone. It's why when the trio of Spideys was trying to interrogate this world's Tony Stark, Kane kind of had to be held back a little before he finally jumped in and started threatening him. This isn't a guy who looks on the bright side of things. This is a guy who's had a very rough life and is just trying to just do the right thing now. Yes, he knows that there's good in the world and that's what he fights for. But this is a guy who, in order to get to the good, will very much cave in a lot of guys' faces to do it, and he is not afraid to push the envelope. And again, he doesn't want to go too far, as even in the narration of the comic, they state that he holds back at the last minute, but at the same time, he's also very much ready to go all out and leave a few broken bones. So I do like that. And then you finally have Ultimate Jessica Drew. Unlike Ben and Kane, she's kind of somewhere in the middle of their attitudes, because unlike them, because she did not have as hard a life as Kane Parker, but likewise her life wasn't all sunshine and rainbows like Ben Reilly's. Ultimate Jessica Drew's life was essentially just from when she was born. She wound up joining up with her world's version of the Avengers called the Ultimates. She wound up getting training from Nick Fury and Captain America. Like the main universe Jessica Drew, she very much has her eyes on the ball and is very mission oriented. She knows the stakes and the cost of what happens if the Spiders will lose, and she tries to remain focused throughout the entire story. story. She knows she knows what could happen if they don't play things right. It's part of the reason why she was able to come up with a plan so easily, and why, despite Ben being all happy to see this world's Tony Stark, she was immediately hesitant and was like, okay, maybe we shouldn't trust this guy. She has more experience in battle, despite the fact that she's only like 2 years old, but it's clear that she is more more focused on the mission than, like, say, Ben. But likewise, she is not as serious as Kane, because at the end of the day, while she is her world's Jessica Drew, she's also a clone of Peter Parker, and you can see flashes of that jocular nature slip through every now and then. When she and Ben and Kane are trying to get out of the hospital, she immediately tells Kane, "Quick, grab us our costumes." And Ben's like, "Wait, what about our cover?" It's like, "I don't care about our cover. It's already blown, and I'm not kicking ass and I'm not going to be fighting bad guys wearing a hospital gown. Odds are there's a clone of J. Jonah Jameson on this world, and I am never going to get those pictures off the internet." That's funny. That's something that I think Peter would prioritize if he was put in a similar situation. And likewise, we see a similar thing when the trio is planning to interrogate this world's Tony Stark. When Jess explains that she was able to remove Tony's armor and that she learned how to do it from her world's Iron Man, Ben asks her, "So how many times did you get electrocuted?" And she just kind of offhandedly says, "Twice. One time I got hit with this gas and made me puke." That's just funny. That sounds like something that Peter would say. There's, again, her attitude feels like a good medium between the two. And again, you can see flashes of Peter Parker in there, but you can also see someone who's very much mission-oriented, who knows the stakes of what they're going through and what can happen if they lose, but ultimately is ultimately willing to make a few quips every now and then to ease the tension. She knows what can happen if they lose, but at the same time, she's a Peter Parker, and while she will try to keep her eye on the ball, she will put in a few pokes and jabs every now and then to get under your skin, which I like. I think that's nice. And it's cool seeing these three different personalities working off of each other. They're all, because despite the fact that all three of them technically came from the same person, they're not the same people. And I like seeing those different kinds of personalities working off of each other. They have a common bond. Because of their origins, but ultimately they're not Peter Parker. They're their own people, and despite some similarities from their genetic template, or despite some similarities with their genetic template, they're not him. Which I like, and I like seeing that kind of personality work off of each other. On top of that, again, it's really cool action I like seeing the action throughout it, as it still has more high-flying action, web-slinging, as we see these different Spideys and their different fighting styles as they work off of each other. I love the design for Genix's universe, because, like I said, it makes sense why a world that Genix conquered would be this technologically advanced. He's the science guy. Any world that he conquered, he'd want to probably be his home away from home, a place he can kick his feet up and continue his experiments. So why wouldn't he modify the world to be his own little science hub? Why wouldn't he control the population to be clones? Why wouldn't he get the most intelligent people on the planet to act as his own personal servants? Of course he would do that. Of course he would do that. He would do that. And I love seeing how it works across this entire world. I love seeing the unique eccentricities of how this universe operates, because despite the fact that Genix rules this world, it has its own status quo, and I was immediately interested in seeing how that operated from the instant I saw this world's Iron Man. Because the instant I saw him, I thought, wait, this world still has superheroes? Well, how do they work? How do these superheroes operate? How much of the original template is in there, and how much is just Genix's meddling? And you kind of see that with this world's Tony Stark. He goes in and he employs a similar attitude that you would expect out of Tony Stark. His arrogance, his anger when his genius is questioned, his attitude when he sees the commotion involving the heavily armed guards and the various spider people, is asking, what the hell's going on here? That feels like Tony Stark. But then you see little snippets of Genix's tampering in there, as he immediately just shows nothing but disdain for the spider people, just happily getting ready to grab all of them because it'll make Genix happy. And then likewise when they ask him where Genix is, he just willingly tells them that Genix lives in the Baxter building because he fully expects them to be killed, and that if they do, he'll get rewarded because he's the one that sent them there. That feels very interesting and unique, and it makes me curious about other aspects of this world. Are the other heroes like this? Are there any other heroes? Or are there just ones that Genix thinks are good for his cause? Like, for example, going back to the final reveal with this world's Johnny Storm being head of security, what happened to this world's Reed Richards? Does Genix even keep a copy of him around? Or did he just dump him because he didn't want someone like that? Was Bree just too smart that Genix couldn't manipulate his mind? Or did he just not want to deal with the hassle and only clone the people that he felt were necessary for his ultimate mission, for what he felt was necessary? I would love to learn more about how this world operates and how Genix has gotten it all kind of working together. I would love to see more of that, and the fact that we just get little snippets of it with both seeing the landscape of this world's New York, seeing the cloning facilities, and yes, seeing this world's superheroes makes me interested in seeing where this goes. I'm like that. It's intriguing. And then finally, another thing I like about this is the narration. All 3 issues of the comic basically have a third-person narration, but the narration usually tends to focus on only one member of the team. Sometimes it branches off depending on the scene, as there was one scene in the comic that showed Genix just sitting in his own facility and thinking about like a scholar, and how a certain phrase that he cited was something that Genix took to heart, but otherwise, the rest of the issue 1 focused more on Jessica in her own point of view, how she thought, how she operated, and how she reacted to all these different spider people, and how she reacted to the situation and Ben and Kane. It makes me I find it to be a nice little character study and further emphasizes the difference between these 3 different spider people. And they're not only just Spideys from different universes, but they're all clones of their respective Peter Parkers. And seeing since all 3 were raised in those different environments, you see how it's affected their demeanors. And likewise, you see that with Jess here, as we see her ruminations on Ben and Kane. How she sees Ben as fast, agile, and quick, but always talking. How Kane is always fury and goes in guns blazing, so to speak. She doesn't use that terminology, but I am, so let's go with it. But likewise, how he holds back despite it all, and how Jessica has to be focused and how she has to tune everything out and just focus on the important bits of the battle, which makes sense, which again I find interesting. And like I said, this is repeated in the other 2 comics, just that those narrations focus on Kane and Ben, depending on the issue. So again, it is rather interesting, and I do like that. Otherwise, though, for the first issue, it's a good start. Again, we get little snippets of seeing the characters interact, and I think their unique characters and distinctive personalities make for some good character interactions, of seeing how as they work off of each other. I love seeing this universe operating under Genix, and basically from the snippets we see, it makes me want to know more about it and how it operates. I love the narration and how it works. It has some great character dialogue and moments between everybody. Overall, definitely a good start to the miniseries, and ultimately makes me intrigued to see where they go from here. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in Thursday as we look at Scarlet Spiders #2. So, till then, hope you have a good day. And take care.